So I'd like to welcome everyone to another episode of Business Science Magazine podcast. I'm here with Carolina Aguilera, and I'm going to do a quick intro of Carolina. She's very accomplished, so this may not be as quick as I'd like, but Carolina holds both a PhD and a master's degree in psychology with an emphasis in behavior analysis from West Virginia University. She holds a bachelor's degree in psychology from Florida International University, my alma mater. Carolina has Golden Panthers, right?
Yeah.
Carolina has written articles for journals such as the Ivy Business Journal and is one of the co-authors of the Behavior Breakthrough, which details the power of behavioral leadership in enabling superior execution and sustained organizational success. She also currently sits on the board of directors of the Spark Imagination and Science Center. Carolina is an expert in the behavioral implications of large-scale organizational change. She has worked with numerous Fortune 100 companies undergoing major change and cultural transformations to provide change leadership, team development, and executive coaching. Currently, Carolina leads the business transformation team at Canon Solutions America's Enterprise Managed Service Division. The transformation team's goals are to help clients define the vision of success for their managed print services, create an optimal print and content culture, and achieve their targeted financial productivity, satisfaction, and sustainability goals. Prior to joining Canon Solutions America, Carolina was a senior principal at the Continuous Learning Group, which is now Alula, a behavior-based strategy execution and performance improvement consulting firm for almost 16 years. As a CLG consultant, Carolina's work in the United States, Europe, and Latin America included coaching leaders and teams in industries such as energy, construction, pharma, healthcare, apparel, retail, packaged foods, media, and financial services to achieve maximum performance during and after change initiatives. That is quite a bio, Carolina. I'm very excited to talk to you today. So let's start kind of at the beginning. What interested you in behavior analysis and organizational behavior management?
Oh, let's see. That's a great question. I took a few psych classes at FIU, so our joint alma mater. And unlike some folks that you hear who sort of they know what they want to do with their life and what they want to study from the get-go, I really took advantage of that, all those general classes that you're encouraged to take early on. And, there was something that was very attractive about psychology, but it wasn't fully there because I've always been a fairly analytical person. I've always been I grew up in a family where, data mattered and evidence mattered and objectivity mattered. And it wasn't until I took a class with Michael Markham, a professor, I believe he graduated from New Mexico, that it must have been Introduction to Behavior Analysis, that sort of it all came together for me. And he generously agreed to let me join his rat lab, where he was doing all kinds of, very cool research on stimulus equivalence. And I was also exposed to, I think I was like one of the first groups of folks who took the board certification down in Florida. It must have been around 97, 98. I could be up.
Was that, I'm sorry, I think we have a little bit of a lag. Was that the Florida CBA before it was the BCBA?
I think so. And it was the associate certification, right? Because I didn't have my bachelor's yet, but I took that and I started working. So I was working with Michael and his lab, and I started working for Behavior Analysis, Inc. And getting to practice, it was just, the most exciting times, right? Like learning things from a textbook and then being able to go straight to the lab, and then a couple of days a week working with kids diagnosed with autism, and comparable diagnoses. I think there was just something very attractive about that. I was always told, if you study psychology, you have to assume you're going to get a master's or a PhD. We had some professors from a professor from West Virginia University come visit, and I was just hooked. I was hooked. I wanted to learn more. I felt that it was truly embodying, you know, everything that I wanted to see in somebody who could provide, you know, services and support and, you know, really make a difference in a way that was evidence-based. So yeah, went to grad school and the rest is history.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, our something that we all talk about internally is our application, the application of our science, behavior analysis science, to the world of business. And it's interesting, when I was reading your bio, it talked about behavioral leadership. And I know that the application of our science kind of started as organizational behavior management, then evolved to performance management, and now it's kind of being referred to as behavioral leadership. But something that's really important to us, I think, as practitioners of behavior science, is how we define things. So how would you define organizational behavior management or behavioral leadership? How would you define that?
Yeah, so I would define it, and you're going to notice that I'm in my language, that because I've worked for almost 20 years in corporate environments with individuals who maybe they know a little bit about Skinnerian psychology. Oh yes, when I was getting my bachelor's, I took a RAT class or a RAT lab, you know, that, or maybe they know about BMOD, you know, and usually frown upon when they think about it, or they know about ABA because of autism. I think one of the things that early on happened in my career was my verbal behavior was shaped, right? So that people could truly understand what we're about, because a lot of folks wonder, like, what the heck is a behavioral analyst or a behavior analyst or behavioral psychologist doing in corporate America? So you'll see that the language that I use, you know, tends to be, you know, very, very, very general, very broad, and I try my best to avoid of jargon. So OBM for me, when people ask, hey, what are you doing? What are you doing in this corporate world? I think it's definitely applying the principles of the science of behavior to organizational settings, industrial settings. No different than my colleagues who apply the science to help pets or kids diagnosed with autism or academia. It's just, it happens to be the area, the environment that we choose to work in.
Absolutely. I think that's a great way to explain it. On that note, I'm curious, how has the way people have treated the word behavior changed throughout your career? Something that I've noticed over the course of the past maybe 5, 6, 7 years, that the business world is becoming a little bit more friendly to the term behavior. I see it in the software practices that I consult with. I see it in general business. I see it in HR departments. What's been your experience with the word behavior?
I would concur. I think especially with the advent of behavioral economics, with the plethora of books that have been written about habits or behaviors, you know, the two sometimes are used interchangeably. People are much, much more comfortable thinking that they know, you know, what we mean by that. Early on in my career, I mean, I will tell you, right out of, as I was getting my PhD, I started working at CLG, now Lula, as you mentioned. And I always had to code switch, right? If you're familiar with that term, where it's like in the lab, you know, there was a very specific verbal repertoire that not only was reinforced, but, you know, it was punished if it wasn't followed, right? To speak very technically. And I think that's right, by the way, you know, as much as I made that remark, I think there's something to be said about, you know, I was trained as a basic researcher, you know, first and foremost, you know, it's slightly different from a lot of my colleagues who do what I do, who, you know, might have gone to universities where from the get-go, they kind of knew that they wanted to work in an organizational setting. But, you know, I grew up in a slightly different setting where sort of the terminology and the precision, you know, truly mattered. And then, you know, every other day I would go to my internship, whether at Aubrey Daniels or at CLG or at Marsh, and people would say, what? Even some of my colleagues, right? Because CLG, one of the interesting things about CLG is that it has, and it still has, a combination of behavior analysts, learning and development HR professionals, and business leaders, right? So you've got this amalgamation of individuals, and we're all trying to understand each other. We're all trying to create, something that's bigger than any one group. And my behavior was shaped to sort of communicate in a way and maybe talk about performance, right? So behavior and results. Maybe downplay the behavioral piece. You wouldn't start a meeting and say, I'm a behavior analyst, get out of the way. I know what I'm here to do. I think things have changed. I know in my current job, it's a plus, right? So actually my PhD, being able to talk about my expertise in the area, but only to some extent, right? I mean, that only takes you so far. Usually that gets, somebody to nod and say, okay, I'll listen to what you have to say. I think after that, it's all about the practicality. It's all about like, okay, you're here, I'm sitting across from you. How are you adding value? How are you helping my business? How are you helping me? How are you helping my team? And then it's not so much about behavior, but it's about, okay, what are the results? What's the problem we're trying to fix? And who are the performers who can most impact those behaviors? And what are all the levers that we could pull from to achieve those results? So it becomes less about the science, right, per se, and more about the application of it and how we're adding value every step of the way.
Absolutely. And it's, as you were talking, it made me think of, I went to a conference recently, and you mentioned Aubrey Daniels. So somebody that is very prominent at Aubrey Daniels,
Sure.
Judy Agnew, and she was doing a talk, and she said, as behavior analysts, we don't like to use terms like employee engagement and things like that. But she said, if you want to get results like you were talking about, sometimes you need to use those terms. Just make sure to explain them behaviorally.
Yes.
Is that the process that you take?
Absolutely. I'm a big believer in talking about, classes of behaviors, right? I mean, we, for example, in my world, one of the things that we aim to help our clients achieve is a optimal print culture, right? And that's sort of like the sentence, or that's sort of the label that we put. If you double or triple click, you start getting down to some of the behaviors that are associated with it, right? But if you had to stop, every step of the way and get to that level of, micro description, I think that would hinder the conversation. So I very much agree with Judy. I think it's about pausing. It's about explaining what we mean by it. It's about using it as in a way, a shortcut, so we can get on. This isn't an academic exercise. This is about, okay, so employee engagement. Okay, what is the problem with employee engagement? Show me the results that you're worried about. Tell me a little bit about why the fact that 50% of senior leaders or employees believe that only 50% of senior leaders are encouraging a high performance culture. Well, okay, how are you correlating that with engagement, and what are some of the lagging and leading metrics that you're worried about? So I wouldn't let some of the language just get in the way. And it was hard for me when I first came out of grad school, right? Because language truly matters, and I believe it does. But I think you have to keep the bigger goal in mind when you're communicating with the lay folks, as we sometimes call them.
Absolutely. You said something just a minute ago. You said print culture. What is that?
So an optimal print culture, it's usually what our clients want to achieve when they hired Canon Solutions America to work with them. We are a division that, in a nutshell, people go to when they want to outsource all of their print services. So, think about whether it's an organization, a corporate America, or a university. They just don't want to worry about the devices, the services, the support, the maintenance that is involved in multifunction devices and printers and faxes and scanners. That's sort of like at the basic level. Beyond that, you know, the reason why clients hire us is because they don't just want to sort of outsource that, but they've got this pretty lofty goals of what they want to do. It's usually associated with some sort of digital transformation that the organization might be undergoing. And they want people to print more securely, to be more financially focused, to increase, you know, the satisfaction of, you know, being able to communicate information across the organization, to be more sustainable. Like one of my favorite aspects of what I do is sometimes in a small way, sometimes in a bigger way, you know, we're helping decrease the use of electricity, the use of paper. So Adam, it's about changing the way people sort of deal with paper, right? You know, sort of like this association that folks have. I, for one, don't usually print. I've been a consultant all my life. I live on the road, and as anybody who travels a lot knows, you want to minimize how much paper there is. But there are, you know, a lot of organizations, departments, you know, people who still print quite a bit. So how do we create a print optimal culture where people think twice about printing, where use technology, multiple monitors, where, for example, when they go into a meeting, rather than bring, you know, hard copies of documents, they send pre-reads, you know, so they're much more disciplined in some of their meeting behaviors. All those things that involve, you know, a piece of paper or information, you know, how do we change it so it aligns with an organization's financial productivity, satisfaction, sustainability goals?
So
That's the culture.
So when we were communicating via email, the first thing that came to my mind when we were talking about what you do on a day-to-day basis was a lot of change management. So is that accurate? And how do you build in behavior analysis into that? How do you connect behaviors to results? And just a minute ago, it sounded like you were talking about mission alignment, making sure that job missions are connected to outcomes and things like that. So I know that was like 4 different questions at once. Feel free to just cut.
Yeah, let me pick the one that I want to answer. Well, so yes, so mission alignment. So a lot of that was heavily what I did when I was a consultant at CLG, now Alula. I think what's exciting for me in my job at Canon Solutions America is that it's a very focused goals, right? And when people work with us, they're not hiring me as a behavior analyst, which is what used to happen in the past, you know. So as a consultant, an organization, let's say, was going through this major transformation, right? And they would maybe a new technology, a new ERP system, and they would hire sort of the experts on the software, and maybe they would hire experts on process improvement, and then they would hire us. We were the behavioral people, you know, usually one behavioral person, you know, with 80 consultants that were focused on, you know, the real important things, the strategy, the technology, and, you know, we would be the ones saying, hold on, but, you know, how exactly are you going to get people to do all the things you need them to do to really achieve the ROI of this transformation? So that was in my previous life. I think currently when clients hire us, they hire the whole package. You know, it's a truly value proposition, right? So we like to say, and we have data to show that, you know, we've got, you know, the best equipment, the best technology, you know, the best people out there. What we can now say is that, you know, as part of hiring us, there's a group of experts. You know, my job and my team's job is only to figure out how do we get end users from current state, from whatever they're doing now, whatever that current state is when it comes to their print culture, to the vision that the organization has set for the future. So that space right there, you know, which is sort of a key definition of change management, that is our playground, and that is what we're responsible for. Oh, and by the way, you know, our promise is we don't just want people to have to do that, but we want people to want to. You know, we want that discretionary effort. We want people to change their habits, not just in the beginning, right? When you first maybe have new equipment and maybe a nice poster and nice training, but 6 months from now, 12 months from now, a few years from now, you want people to just fundamentally change, you know, the way they handle information, they process information, you know, day in and day out. That space right there, that white space, that's what my team and I keeps us up at night, trying to figure out, you know, how do we do that seamlessly and as effectively as possible.
Can you give me an example of that? So like, and how do you build in behavior analysis? What are some of the technologies, some of the interventions that you use? So
Sure.
pinpointing, scorecards, that sort of thing.
Yeah, so our number one tool, to no surprises, to no surprise to anybody who does what we do, is the ABC analysis, right? So, and I do this with our clients, you know. So we have a phased approach in our change methodology, and early on, the most important thing as a good behavior analyst is for us to define the goals, right? So what is it that you're trying to do in a way that's measurable, you know, it's replicable, both lagging indicators, you know, so things that it's going to take us a while to achieve, as well as more leading indicators, right? So that right there is one of the key aspects of our science, right? You start with goals, with objective, you know, with evidence. Then the question is, out of all the people in this organization, out of all the key performer groups, who can most impact these goals, right? So then getting down very much to the individual behavior, to the individual, you know, person. Again, that is a key principle of, you know, the science of behavior analysis. So goals, who can most impact, and what is it that we want them to do, right? So pinpointing the specific behaviors. So I mentioned a few, a good one, Adam, super not very sexy behavior, but really important is things like print in black and white, right? Versus color. Color is like 6-10 times more expensive. Even now, I mean, in the past, it was like, I don't know, 100 times more expensive. Now it's a little bit more. So something as simple as that. Hey, print double-sided, right? Because that's one less sheet of paper. You know, Mother Nature is thanking you, and your bottom line is thanking you. So it's like zeroing in on the specific behaviors. Hey, give up your single function device. You may not know this, but before I started working at Canon Solutions America, I had no idea how attached some people are to that single function printer, to that fax, to that scanner. I mean, I'm telling you, big time attachment. That's a big transition, right? It's like, we're going to take this device from your office, which, you know, you used to be able to just reach in and get. And now you're going to have to walk maybe 10 steps, maybe 20 steps to this multifunction device, right? That it can do everything for you more securely, more effectively, more sustainably, in a more sustainable manner. That transition. So you see how we start breaking down what are the specific behaviors that we need, let's say faculty, you know, we work with a lot of universities, faculty or students or staff to do. Then it's like, okay, so we got the behaviors. So how the heck do we get people going and get these behaviors increase awareness or the reasoning behind doing these things, right? So we always start with a case for change, the WIFM, the good old WIFM, what's in it for them. Let's not tell people this university is going to save $3 million a year. It's like, yeah, whatever. But like, can I please have my single function device back, right? It's like, it doesn't. So what is it for that individual? So we have a lot. So, you know, the training that we conduct, the marketing, the communications, the role modeling, you know, making sure that, you know, leaders are role modeling the right behaviors. Those are all in that antecedent side. And we break it down. And we have, you know, conversation with our clients, you know, where they're deciding what makes sense for their culture, what makes sense for their organization. And then sort of last but not least is the consequence side. You know, so we could do all these things. And, you know, I mentioned earlier that it's easy when there's a change, right? Whether it's in my world or any other change, in the beginning to sort of be in your best behavior, right? To say, I promise I'm going to change my ways and I will use that technology the way it was supposed to, and I will do these things. Fast forward, months or years, and if you were filming that individual working, would they be fully utilizing the technology, the way it was envisioned, the way that senior leader sold it on the benefits of this transformation? So then we work hard on that. We have leadership tips that we develop. We run a leader-led change process. So we say it's about leaders, right? It's 6 months from now, that leader getting a stack like this of papers, right, in preparation for a meeting, and me saying, Adam, I appreciate you doing this, but it's really not necessary. Like, send me an email. Let me give you your papers back. It's sort of, how do you create a culture where leaders are aware, where they care, where they're observing people engage in these behaviors that we've identified, where they reinforce the heck out of it, where they provide coaching, constructive feedback if it's not occurring. So it's sort of like behavior analysis is part of every single aspect of the pre-implementation, the rollout, and the post-implementation of our devices and services program.
Yes, absolutely. That's perfect. So you mentioned leadership a couple of times, and I was an adjunct professor at FIU for about 9 years. So sometimes that educator comes out of me where I have to operationally define certain terms, but I'm curious as to how you define leadership from a behavioral perspective.
Yeah, so I wrote a chapter about it in the behavior breakthrough. I had some handy books here because we emailed back and forth and we said, hey, some of the things that we're going to talk about. So I think we could define what a leader does, either break it down in the kinds of things that you expect him or her to do, day in, day out. I think generally I would say a leader is somebody who ensures that people are doing the right thing, versus a manager who ensures that things are being done right? And I think you need a combination of both. So a leader is that person who is, very clear on what on what him or her, is trying to achieve, in this case from an organizational perspective, and, who is doing the things day in and day out necessary to role model, to inspire, to set expectations, to observe their people and or the results of their people's work in action, to provide feedback, to provide coaching, to just sort of have that be his or her, roles and responsibilities day in and day out. I know there's probably, much more inspiring ways of describing a leader, but for me, that's, as a leader, that's what I aim to do. And, and to do it in a way that people get excited and get passionate. Like I'm naturally a passionate person. Behavior analysis for me and what I do is not just a job, or a career. I mean, it's really the goggles that I use to see the world. So I view my job as, sort of getting people excited and passionate, and to do it in a way that is effective and efficient and pragmatic and realistic. How did you used to define leadership when you were an adjunct professor?
That's a great question. So I would go through all of the different components of leadership from a behavioral perspective. So I would break it down as easily as possible and say, leadership is really being the independent variable. So if you're looking at it from a science perspective, and let's say that you want to change behavior, if you are the change agent that changes someone else's behavior, that is leadership. So, and the reason we used to talk about it that way is to emphasize the point that anyone can be a leader, right? So we would talk about some people would say, well, I'm not a manager, or I'm not in management. And we'd say, well, it doesn't matter. Like, your authority within, or your position within the company doesn't matter necessarily. You can still lead others' behavior.
Yes.
And then we would do a funnel and kind of funnel them down and say, you're not leading people, you're leading behavior. So you're changing behavior. So if you're changing behavior, if you're the change agent that's changing somebody else's behavior, then that's leadership. So we would emphasize that leadership could be done by anyone in any way and at any level. So you could change, you could lead someone's behavior to be more organized at their desk, or you could lead a group of people's behavior to improve their department's numbers. So the level of analysis can change, but leadership remains the same. I don't know, does that make sense?
Yeah, I like it. You know, as you were talking, I was thinking you're sort of like the SD, you're the discriminative stimuli or the antecedent, as well as the consequence, right? I mean, you are that person who's both sort of providing all the tools and the role modeling and the clarity about what you're trying to achieve. And then you're at the other side of the equation, you know, providing the feedback and the coaching. And absolutely, I agree with you. You know, I talk about leader as with a capital L or lowercase l, right?
Yes.
It's, I have, you know, for 20 years, my work has been really as an influencer, you know, so as a formal leader, it only comes into play, you know, with the people that I'm actually, you know, that report into me. But, you know, to me, that, you know, that authority is probably the least likely skill set that or thing that I should be leveraging to be successful, right? I mean, it's really my ability to influence, my ability to be clear about the goals we're trying to achieve, my ability to be your biggest cheerleader, to role model what needs to be done. And absolutely, it does not require a formal title. On the contrary, so let's say in my world, of course, I want to make sure there's alignment, you know, with the sponsor of our work, with the leaders of the individuals whose behaviors we're trying to modify. But really, I also want to talk to that admin, right, who is so critical, who everybody goes to, you know, whenever there's a problem. I want to talk to the business, the financial analyst, you know, the gentleman or the woman who holds the purse, because, you know, like their ability to, you know, help make the right decisions, to drive the right behaviors. I want to talk to those individuals who we call change champions, you know, the folks who, you know, feel really strongly about the new technology and the new change, and, you know, have drank the Kool-Aid and can be ambassadors for whatever change you're trying to do. And yeah, most often those are not necessarily the formal leaders in an organization per se.
You know, you were mentioning all the positives about change management. So I'd like to touch on the negatives or some of the challenges that you run into a little bit. So the people, I don't want to say the people, but sometimes the comments that you hear. So when people say, when you're going to implement a big change initiative and people say, well, I've already done that, it won't work. And they have a very negative attitude towards whatever type of change that you're trying to implement. How do you deal with that? How do you overcome that?
I don't overcome it. I make sure leaders overcome it.
Oh, I love that. I love that.
So yeah. So I am an influencer. I am a change agent and a change advisor, a change consultant. I tell my clients, I could be in front of you, I could be next to you, or I could be behind the scenes. You know, some of my most effective and successful engagements, you know, I'm perfectly fine, you know, being behind the scenes. We work through leaders, right? We work through the consequence providers. You know, we work through the influencers in an organization. So that's one answer. The other answer is, of course, you know, you hear it all. You know, one thing that you didn't mention, which is like, to me, is front and center, is people are busy, right? I mean, no matter what change it is, right? Whether it's a small change or it's like a major strategic initiative, there is a lot of like, we're really fighting for people's focus and for people's time. And it's a real thing, right? You know, I, as an end user, as a employee myself, I'm bombarded with, you know, changes every day. And where do I point to? You know, what do I choose to prioritize? Ultimately, and I tell this to my clients, my manager, right? What are the expectations that she sets for me? How is she defining success for me? Yes, I might think that the you know, major transformation that we're going through, if I was, you know, queen for the day, is that what we would be focusing on? You know, probably not. And, you know, and I'm lucky enough to have a seat at the table. You know, I work with a group of senior leaders where, by the very nature of, you know, what I did before joining Canon Solutions America, you know, they respect what I bring to the table, you know, beyond what I do for the team. And we're now focusing on supporting some of the biggest internal transformations that our own division is going through, right? So that is an added advantage. But, you know, at some point, you know, what my manager chooses to share as an expectation, you know, how she evaluates, you know, my performance. And I don't just mean like at the end of the year in a formal, but the feedback that she provides me, the questions that she asks, that is how, you know, I get my cues about what's important or not. When people have things like when they say, oh, I've done that before, or, you know, why are we doing this now? You know, the other thing to focus on is like, how can we get them excited? How can we get them motivated? How can we increase their awareness, you know, their desire? That is part of my responsibility as a change consultant, right? So that's where the training, the marketing, the communications, you know, all those things that we do up front are so critical. But again, I need to rely on my leaders on the back end to be the ones reinforcing the heck out of those successful approximations to, you know, the target behaviors that we're trying to reinforce. Though, you know, we need them to say, no, it is not acceptable, right, for you to deviate, or for you to choose not to follow the program, but to find, you know, workarounds. I can help, I can coach, I can advise, but it's really through leaders that, you know, we go hard after some very real and, you know, sometimes, you know, very accurate concerns that people have about the change at hand.
You know, I'm so excited when you brought up leading leaders, because that sounds like that's a big part of your job. And and as behavior analysts, we always talk about not only how do you define things, but how do you measure them. And I think that that's one of the primary measures of great leadership is how many other leaders do you produce? So not just about changing their behavior, but how many other leaders do you produce? So it sounds like you're in that specific position. I asked you that question. I said, you know, how do you deal with these problems? And you said, I don't. I train and provide feedback and support. So antecedents and consequences for the leaders that you work with, right?
I do, absolutely. Just what you were saying earlier reminded me when I was an executive coach, usually, you know, one of the first things we would do is we would define, you know, success for the coaching engagement, and both sort of short term, medium, and longer term. And I would always be provocative in some of the goals that we would set. And one of them was, if today, right, like I'll ask you, Adam, like if you were leaving, you know, your current role, I don't have any information. There's no reason for me to believe that you would, but if you were, right, and let's say you had a group of people reporting to you and you said, hey, I'm leaving, who's coming with me? How many people would raise their hand, right? I mean, I have worked with, you know, some pretty amazing people, and not just sort of this, you know, subjective statement, but leaders who say, oh yeah, I work with Bobby and Janie and you know, and Billy, you know, 3 jobs ago, and they just keep following me, right? I bring them with me, or, you know, whether it's across jobs or even within jobs. So I think there's some very cool ways in which, you know, you can measure sort of the the quality, the effectiveness of a leader. And for sure, that's one of them. How do they lead, and who's willing to follow when they have a choice?
No, yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I don't think that you can have a discussion about measuring leadership if you're not measuring follower behavior, right? So if the followers aren't literally following you to other jobs, I mean, maybe they don't, but something as well is, let's say I were to leave my position, which I'm not, but if I were to leave my position and I had a lasting positive reputation. So when people spoke about me, 3 months, 6 months, a year from now, where I am right now, and it was still positive, I think that's a good measure of leadership as well. But definitely follower behavior has to be tied in, right?
Yeah, it's important. It's important, right? And going back to a statement you made earlier, not just the legacy of the C-suite or the senior leadership, but I think there, some people, maybe people can view it as reputation. I don't think that's the right word, but the legacy, I always used to tell my coaching clients, when you go into a room, what are you doing to that environment, right? Talk about being very behavioral. It's like, are you raising the conversation, the stakes? Are you making things better? At the very least, are you leaving them neutral, right? Because it's a high expectation to assume that, you're always going to walk inside a room and, brilliant things will happen. But for sure, making sure that you're not sort of taking the air out of people and creating, an environment where people are worse off than they were when they first came in. So I think you could take that to when somebody leaves an organization. First of all, what's that legacy? What are the processes that they've put in place, right? So as you become a leader, and one of my goals in my current position is, if tomorrow I were to get hit by a bus, hopefully not, what's behind, right? You can't just count on, one person, 2 people, 3 people to be the ones that are sort of holding everything. But what are we doing as far as creating processes and a programmatic approach, and also changing our workflows and the way we interact with other functions within the organization, so that it's not dependent on one hero or 2 heroes, but it's dependent on a whole system that stays there long after you're gone. I mean, that is another way that you can measure long after the fact, the impact that a leader has had.
I love that. That's fantastic. I'd like to make a kind of a hard left turn here and go back to the print culture that you were talking about earlier. Something I wanted to ask earlier is, there's such a big transition happening now, and it's been happening for a good number of years, away from paper. So there's been a push. Every single bill that I get some sort of incentive. So there's a behavior analyst working there somewhere, and they'll say, we'll give you X amount of dollars off your bill if you switch to paperless. I always get frustrated now too when people send contracts over to me to print out and sign. I'm like, oh my gosh, why don't you have a DocuSign account? Or why aren't you using Sign Now or one of those digital signature features? So I guess my question is, how are you and Canon dealing with that transition to a paperless business world?
It's a great question, and it's one that our organization, is facing and understands, and it's very real, right? When you look at, predictions of, how much paper or what, the future would look like, it's, sort of trending definitely downward. We're working with a university right now. It's, one of the top universities in the world, which has set a goal for themselves to become paperless by 2030. And by the way, we're excited about that. And we want to partner, and we want to be, part of that first organization that can achieve that goal. So that's just the reality of our industry, the reality of the space in which we work. How do we address it? Well, a few ways. By people printing, that is not, the only way, in which with our business model works. And, we also have, software. We have, consulting and professional services. So, it's a whole package so that there are other revenues and other aspects of our business model. Ultimately, though, my goal, and really my whole division's goal, is to adhere to the contract, to help our clients achieve what they're hoping to achieve, in this case, from their managed program. And guess what? 99.99% of our clients want to decrease costs, right? So it's what they want. Some people say to me, so wait a second, so you are trying to get people to print less, even more so than they're currently doing, but wouldn't that hurt your organization? And so we have to look at it a little bit more in a macro way, right? Our clients want to achieve that, right? It's not, do we want them to or not? It's like they are hiring us so that we can guarantee them, according to our projections, 10% decrease, 20% decrease in revenue, in cost, and maintenance fees. We're guaranteeing them, increased sustainability. We're guaranteeing them, increased satisfaction. So it's what the client wants us to do. Like, our goal is to help them achieve that. That is what success looks like. So there will always, I think, be a need for paper, I think, at least in my lifetime. But, how that paper is used and what are some of the alternative ways in which, our people are communicating, sharing content, and my organization's ability to also monetize that, right? And continue to create the software and the technology that can help in that arena, continue to form partnerships with, for example, document management services organizations, right? So it's really viewing, we talk about print or content culture that goes beyond a piece of paper and how do we get people to print more, right? So it's really more of a holistic approach. Ultimately, it's about, what do you, client, want to achieve? When we say we can commit to helping you do that, we do. And the behavior analysis support and the change management support is usually one of the top reasons why people say they come to us. So it's not a nice to have, it's a must have.
I love that. I love that. I was just thinking about how you're such a great representative of Canon, but I'll get back to that towards the end. But, I was thinking about some of the other companies as you were talking about that do that sort of thing. So you and I were both not born, but we both lived in Florida for a significant amount of time. And the really only company that deals with power management in Florida is FPL, Florida Power and Light. And they have several different programs that help their customers save money. So don't waste as much electricity, don't use as much power. They send people out to their businesses or their homes or their places of business to show them how to save money based on, like you said, their goals. I was also thinking of other companies like Progressive Insurance that has the little monitor that goes in your car, and the better you drive, the less they charge you on your premiums. So I think companies like those and like Canon are really the sustainable businesses, the ones that partner with their customers to achieve their goals like you were talking about.
Absolutely. And we have to continue to, as an organization, get creative and innovative in monetizing other aspects, right? Because we are a business, right? Florida Power and Light, they are a business. So you always have to wonder, right? And it's probably a good exercise for your listeners and for us. If a company is discouraging you from using electricity, what's in it for them? So what is the benefit to this organization? Why the heck are they not saying, don't turn your AC ever off, or, especially in Florida, don't turn any light off? Is it just because they want to sound like they're saying the right things, right? Or is there some, and my mind goes to, well, the capacity of their grids, right? For example, so every organization that is saying those things you try to understand, what's behind it. Again, for us, it's the reason why clients are hiring us. It's the reason why clients are trusting us in outsourcing this, right? Because we've made a certain commitment, and we have service level agreements, and we have, periodic business reviews, etc. It's not that we're, super nice people, but that is our business model, and that is the commitment that we have,
yes,
to the
two
people
things
that
I heard there. So now to bring it back to behavior analysis, I see that you have a lot of, number one, goal alignment between Canon and customers, and say, what are your goals? These are our goals. How can we meet them together? And then the other thing too that you brought up as well is, at least what I heard, was the concept of trust. So if FPL, and I don't want to pick on FPL, I actually think they're a great company, but companies like theirs that want to help you save money. So I think you were alluding to, so what's their motivation? So do you feel like, as part of the change management process, trust is important? And I kind of define trust behaviorally as say-do correspondence. So
100%. Yep.
Like that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's one of the other many reasons why I joined my organization was the promise that I would be working, within sort of a environment that were highly objective and evidence-based and data rich. I mentioned to you in the communications that we had prior to our conversation today that we're about to release, what we're calling a business intelligence portal. And it allows both account teams as well as clients at their fingertips to just know real time who is doing what, when it comes to their managed print program. And so when you talk about trust, it's sort of like, here are the data, here is what is happening. And I think sort of committing to specific savings, committing to specific satisfaction goals, committing to, fill in the blank. So saying that we're going to do something and then being able to follow up on it, that is the epitome of trust, right? That is the epitome of what I think you would want in any organization, in any vendor out there. So yeah, it's important to us, and in a way it's everything, because you lose that trust, and our contracts are usually 5 years, kind of an average. After 5 years, they would be, bye-bye. And we have a tremendous record of sort of renewals. And I think ultimately it's about trust. And hey, you said you were going to do something, you helped us achieve it. And then the other aspect is the continuous improvement mentality that's part of our program, right? It's never like, okay, great, we're saving you X millions of dollars, so let's just coast, right? It's, our model is, and you have annoying people like me who are always like, well, what's the next goal? Hey, we achieve our commitments, right? But what's next? What else is happening? What opportunities are there as organizations are expanding or as they're changing their model, et cetera, et cetera? What's there? And, we stay in the mix. The other aspect that's unique about us is, because we're part of sort of this package that a client gets, we don't just disappear, right? We're there, and we're called upon anytime those goals continue to be incrementally modified to then say, okay, from a behavioral standpoint, what can you do? What can you do for us?
I love that continuous improvement. The environment is constantly changing, meaning the behavior is constantly changing. So continuous improvement, I think, is absolutely required. So as part of how we always close out these interviews, I always like to ask about what's on the horizon for you. So what's up next? What's the current project you're working on, or what are you going to be working on next? Do you have any speaking gigs coming up? Anything like that?
Yeah, so there's lots of exciting things that are happening as far as being able to focus part of my team's efforts and, the value that we bring internally. I alluded to earlier that we're now part of some of the, some pretty big transformations that are going on within our own organization. And that's shifted, right? When I was first hired, it's always been first and foremost about our end users, our clients. Now we have the opportunity. I've been able to bring in, an amazing, group of people. We are building up the capabilities of groups of folks who have been at Canon Solutions America for many years. So we're sort of a transformation team in transformation so that we can now sort of face outwards as well as help internally. So all kinds of really cool things that, maybe in a separate conversation we can talk about. As far as speaking gigs, we haven't finalized our schedule for next year, but I tend to speak at conferences like the National Association of Educational Procurement Professionals or conferences on shared services. I am, and this is like my commitment, I'm saying it out loud, so I have to follow through with it. I have been itching to go back to ABA International, right? And what I've been waiting for, our yearly conference, I've been waiting for data, as again, I was trained as a basic researcher. So I want to go back, and I feel like now with the business intelligence portal that we have, we'll actually be able to see real time. Let's say, imagine we work across a whole organization as we start putting forth, different change initiatives, behavioral change initiatives in certain departments, in certain areas of the organization, how that's affecting data real time, the impact that it has maybe vis-a-vis, other groups that we're not working with, and the different things that that we're continuing to perfect and improve upon for how to be very effective, right? I mean, again, people are bombarded with change every day. It's like, I'm a big believer, you do the least amount of when it comes to change management, you do as little as possible and as much as is necessary. We want to get behavior from here to here. How do we do it? How do we go in and out? Because guess what? This person is the print culture piece, which for me is everything. It's, number 99 in a list of 100 things that this person is currently facing, right? So how can we, just be very pragmatic, very effective in what we do? So would love to go back to ABA. I've got, behavior analysts in my crew who are also itching to go back and share some of the what I think are pretty cool and innovative approaches that we're taking to working with our clients and now to working internally within our division.
I love it. And I'm actually, I hope you're okay with it, but I'm totally going to steal that line. As little as possible, as much as necessary. I love that.
I didn't come up with it. I wish I wish I could tell you that. I think one day I was like, where the heck did I get that? And I might have Googled it, and I saw that it's kind of funny. The groups of folks who are interested in maintaining heritage sites, that's how they view the world. It's like, hey, we're gonna maintain this historic home. How few things can we do to maintain the integrity of this home? But hey, if we need to spend, millions and years renovating, we will. I view change like that. It's like, hey, that's why it's so important to be very clear with what you're trying to achieve, right? Because then that tells you how much fit for purpose, how do you throw everything? Do you throw the kitchen sink, right? Or let's just be honest, in many cases, world-class training, good communications, a good set of antecedents, as long as they're supported by consequences, that might be sufficient. And that's awesome. That's great, because then that gives that individual, that gives us the space to then focus on other things, right? On the next change coming up or the next goal that needs to be achieved.
I love that. I was just going to give you credit for it. You're going to be my reference.
You could do it. You could do it too. Yes. I came up with that.
Excellent line. So Carolina, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. And we hope everybody on the podcast enjoys this episode, and look for us on another episode of Business Science Magazine podcast.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right, and we are off. So I just stopped recording. So just on a personal note, thank you again for joining us. I did want to ask you something really quickly. Were you okay with me asking about the transition to digital? I know we didn't talk about that ahead of time, but I was actually just curious about it.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, yeah, that it's actually what's front and center for the majority of our clients. You know, whether they refer to it as, you know, paperless or not. That's where, you know, that's where the world is and continues to head. So absolutely.
All right, sounds great. So thank you again for the time, and you'll be hearing from our office, and they'll be sending over a copy of the video and the transcription. And if you need any changes, just let us know.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you, Adam. It was fun. Talk to you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.